Did you know that there are actually 3 different notices for non-payment of rent in the state of California? In this guide for tenants and landlords, we're going to run through all 3 of them. Hey there, Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates. We've been helping renters and landlords make the best decisions and understand what's going on in the state of California during these crazy days. And we're here with a big update on the 3 different notices that could go to renters who miss rent. And you may be wondering why I say this is a guide for tenants and landlords. It sure sounds like we're telling landlords exactly how to get rid of tenants. But the reason renters need to watch this as well is so they can make sure that if they've been served a notice, that it is the correct notice. Of course, like we always say, before you serve a notice, landlord, reach out for legal assistance. And renters, if you receive a legal notice, make sure you reach out to lawhelp.org so you can understand exactly what your rights are. Now remember, we can't give tax or legal advice, but for the most honest and up-to-date real estate advice, subscribe to this channel. One important point is to make sure that you understand if there is a local eviction moratorium in place. For example, we have discussed the difference between the Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County eviction moratoria under AB 2179. We recommend you check out all that content because in LA City, for example, a landlord can't deliver any of these notices. So if you're ready to dive into the 3 different notices for non-payment of rent and the notice to terminate tenancy, hit that like button and let's get started. How much do you like when I create infographics? Hopefully this helps break it down and make it easier to understand. And of course, my email newsletter subscribers, they're going to get this infographic and you can stare at it a whole lot longer than this video if you want. So let's run through. We're going to talk about 3-day notices to pay or quit, 15-day notices to pay or quit, and the notice to terminate tenancy. For a landlord who's going to terminate a tenancy for a tenant who's been an occupant for a year or less, would be a 30-day notice. If it's more than a year, it's a 60-day notice. And then a 90-day notice would be for tenants who are on a voucher program like Section 8. And that was as of October 2021. The landlords are able to give those notices out. And a lot of folks don't realize that that's another route to go. You don't necessarily have to go through the non-payment of rent, 3-day or 15-day notice and move to an unlawful detainer. You could ignore that and still do the notice to terminate tenancy. I've done content on that, and I'm going to do a refresher on that 60-day notice as well. So let's discuss the notices for non-payment of rent. So really what it boils down to is when the non-payment of rent occurred. So you can see the transition period for the purposes of this is September 2020 to September 2021. And then we get into the recovery period, October 2021 through March of 2022. And then there's now. For a 15-day notice, which I'm going to show you that in a little bit here, 15-day notice was for transition period rent. For any rent that's due for the recovery period, you're able to give that 3-day notice, but it has special language I'll show you. And then if you're just going to give a notice for non-payment of rent for April 2022 or later, then it would be a normal 3-day notice. These are just like the old ones before COVID, and I'm going to run through that with you. It's entirely possible that a tenant owes rent that overlaps some of these different time periods, and the rental assistance hasn't been paid. So what happens in that case is theoretically a landlord will have to deliver multiple notices for the different time periods. So we're going to run through these notices and show you the differences quickly. All right, we're going to do this quickly. I always promise that, and they always end up going longer than I think. But we're going to run through quickly and we're going to run backwards. So number 4 on the list was the notice of termination of tenancy. So this is the 30, 60, 90-day notice. And this hasn't changed since October. Nothing new here. Basically, what it boils down to is whether the property is subject to the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, also known as AB 1482. Now, it's not required that you use this realtor form, but the language that's on here is what is required. What you have to bear in mind is that if a property is subject to the Tenant Protection Act, if they're subject to AB 1482, the tenant will need to be given a notice that states why the tenancy is being terminated and they'll be required to be paid rental assistance. Most of the state, it's 1 month's rent, but other areas it's higher. And this is only in the case of no fault termination of tenancy. This is not at fault. This is not where they turn their property into a meth lab. You don't have to give them a 60-day notice and pay them to move out then. That's a 3-day notice, a different one from the non-payment of rent. If the property is exempt, the landlord must let the tenant know it's exempt and then isn't required to give any reason for the termination and isn't required to give the relocation assistance. We've done other videos on that, and it's time for me to do a new one. So be on the lookout for a new AB 1482 video. And now we're moving on to number 3. So this would be the transition period rent. This is a 15-day notice. We'll show you this next. And this is the 15-day notice for transition period rent. And this is a new form, even though we're talking about a period that's a while ago. This has been updated for April based on AB 2179. And the difference is if a landlord is going to give a notice and request this money, this is the important language that must be on there. It's a notice from the state of California. This was in AB 2179, and it said that before October 1st of 2021, you had to pay at least 25% of missed rent, or, and this is important to know, or you completed an application for government rental assistance on or before March 31st, 2022, which obviously we're beyond that now while shooting this video, but those things would protect a tenant from being evicted for non-payment of rent during those periods. For this time period, there were provisions for high-income tenants if they made over 130% of the area median income when they went into the tenancy. Theoretically, they had to show proof that their income was hurt by COVID, but there were interesting ways around this as well. And then there was other paperwork that needed to go to tenants. And if you watch my videos, landlords, you gave those to your tenants, and tenants, you know whether or not your landlord gave them because you were watching my videos too. Moving to number 2. So this is the 3-day notice for rent that's due in the recovery period, and their special language will show you. Moving on to the recovery period, 3-day notice to pay or quit. And this is for rent that was due between October 1st of 2021 and March of 2022. During this time period, a landlord could give a 3-day notice to pay or quit. But if a tenant applied for rental assistance, a landlord could not move forward with the unlawful detainer. And this is whether the rent was missed due to COVID or not due to COVID. And tenants no longer had to pay 25% of monthly missed rent. And the rental assistance program was theoretically moving in full swing. It still took a while, and it's still taking a while to get the funds out, but housingiskey.com was launched and getting theoretically money out to folks. This form has been revised per AB 2179. It now has special language on it, and this is what it says right here. If you completed the application for rental assistance on or before March 31st, 2022, you may have protections against eviction, and then they suggest you reach out to an attorney, which of course we always suggest. What's important about this is that if a landlord is giving this notice and includes the back rent that's due during this time period, the landlord most likely can't evict unless the tenant finally gets a denial of rental assistance, which it's still taking time. So the landlord is going to have to wait to move forward with the unlawful detainer if a landlord asks for rent from this time period. And what you're most excited about, I'm sure, if you could ever be excited about 3-day notices, this is the notice for April, May, and June when rent is missed. And here is the 3-day notice to pay or quit. It's just like the old one, but there is no special language on here like we just saw in the other forms. And if a landlord moves forward and delivers one of these forms for rent that's missed for April, May, or June of 2022, then an unlawful detainer can move forward. And that's the loophole we discussed in our other video. If a landlord does not claim any of the back rent is owed on the notice, they don't have to use the 15-day notice. They don't have to use the previous modified 3-day pay or quit notice I just showed you. They use this notice, and an unlawful detainer can theoretically move forward. We know there are some eviction attorneys out there that are doing this very thing. So even if that rent is owed for those time periods, the landlord isn't putting it on this notice, and they're able to move forward. So it's important if you receive a notice as a tenant that you reach out for legal assistance. And landlords, before you move forward with delivering any of these notices, we recommend that you consult with an attorney. Leave your comments below. Let us know what questions you have about all these different notices. Of course, subscribe to our free weekly email newsletter so you get these infographics and you get all these updates, whether you are a landlord or renter. And make sure you watch this playlist playlist where we cover the most up-to-date information on evictions in the state of California and beyond. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates, and we want to hear from you.